Generally, if somebody gets hit by a train, the train is going to win. Yeah, it's unforgiving.
For the transit rail industry, creating a safe environment in the neighborhoods they travel and the people they serve is a never-ending battle. Trying to prevent trespassing so people aren't hit by trains is often the single most challenging part of their jobs.
This comes down to the industry we're in. There is always that concern that someone has crossed into our right-of-way who should not be there.
It's something that we're constantly dealing with, trying to find better ways to prevent strikes, trespasser strikes, vehicle strikes.
And frustrating because why?
They keep happening.
And when they do happen, especially when a death is involved, the incident can have a profound impact on everyone involved, including the conductor, first responders, the maintenance crews, and especially the train operator.
Trespassing and fatalities not only affect the people involved and their families, it affects the people in the locomotives themselves in ways that I think the general public doesn't fully appreciate.
I've learned throughout my career that, and what my counselor had said to me is, you pay now or you pay later. You talk about it now or you're going to deal with it later on. And if you don't deal with it within 72 hours, you're going to have some issues. You will have flashbacks. So it's best to take care of it right then.
Nearly 5,000 people were struck by trains in the United States during the 5-year period ending in 2019. According to the figures from the Federal Railroad Administration, more than half of those strikes ended in fatalities.
Trespassing on rail rights-of-way has been an issue as long as we've had railroads. And with rails going historically where people want to go, a lot of times there's a natural magnetism to it, or their people will come to the railroads.
Javier Molina knows that firsthand. He's been with Dallas Area Rapid Transit since the beginning of its passenger rail operation. In 1996, he was operating the train that hit a pedestrian. It was the first strike his agency recorded. Luckily, the man lived.
Took his handkerchief out, put it over his head. I said, "Let me get you EMS." No, I'll go to my doctor. Says I should have paid attention, and walked away.
As a result of the increased numbers of trespassing incidents in the rail transit and commuter rail industry, the Transportation Research Board Transit Cooperative Research Program released Project TCRP A-44 to examine ways to deter trespassing on rail rights-of-way.
TTI has a long history of investigating safety issues throughout the entire transportation network. This particular project is really focused on that interaction between the pedestrians and the rail system.
Using surveys and case studies, the research team developed a guidebook and spreadsheet tool to assist in selecting mitigating countermeasures appropriate for the rail system type, problem location, and ease of implementation.
Every agency recognizes that trespassing is a concern, but not every agency realizes they can proactively address trespassing through implementation of countermeasures. So our goal was to produce tools that can assist with identifying possible countermeasures for agencies tackling specific trespassing issues.
One of the key things that people want to look at is, why are people crossing the tracks? Why are they walking along the tracks? And is it a recreational site that just happens to be across the track from a trail? Is it a convenience store across from an apartment complex? Or is it a shortcut to walk down the tracks? And whether it's the installation of fence, it's signing, working with the transit police, the local police, along with engineering, to come up with the best answer.
Keep in mind, safety officials within the industry know that sometimes, especially because you're dealing with human behavior, what appears to be a logical solution to a trespassing problem may not fully work.
You work with all your departments, your engineering, your operations, and you try to come up with ways where you know you have a problem area, and then you think you have a solution, you go out there, you implement it, and a week later you got another trespasser.
Powers spends much of her time trying to solve trespassing issues at the rail stations. She blames a lot of those problems on distraction, especially because of personal electronic devices.
We have pedestrian crosswalks at stations. And people now are on their phones and they're looking down. They're not paying attention to anything around them. And they have earphones in and looking down. That's kind of the common norm. And we have a lot more trespassing at the actual stations now.
Experts say don't be discouraged. Keep trying. Focus on education, communication, and the various resources that can help reduce trespassing, including this one.
We can't fully eliminate it, and it's going to be difficult to absolutely prevent someone from getting on the right-of-way. We can do a lot to make it better. And that's what this report provides, is the state-of-the-art and the current practices on how we can do the best we can to prevent trespassing.
For more information about this project, visit the TCRP website at this address. You can also contact Jeff Warner with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute for additional questions or comments.
I did want to start by showing my appreciation for those local agencies and people that participated in our video. I thought it turned out really well, and I would not have been successful without y'all's participation. So if some of y'all may be in the audience, if so, I truly appreciate that. I wanted to show the video. One, I thought it provided a very good overview of our particular project and some of the issues that are involved with trespassing. But more importantly, I wanted to show the emotion involved with trying to mitigate trespassing. You can just really hear it in the voices of those that are out there every day operating those trains and trying to deal with keeping the people off the tracks and operating safely. The first thing that we need to ask is, well, what is rail trespassing? I'm not sure I was prepared when we started our project, the amount of different definitions that were out there, lots of stuff in literature. And of course, there's different official definitions of trespassing depending on which agency that you're dealing with. And a lot of that is differences in reporting requirements at each agency. So FRA and FTA both have their specific reporting requirements, and so they have a little bit different definitions. And so what the reason I bring that up is it's kind of hard to say, well, how many trespassing incidents are there, or how much trespassing is there? Well, it's hard to just put it in one bucket because there's a bunch of different buckets that define trespassing. And so it makes it a little bit harder. Maybe I'm just, as a researcher, I'm kind of just talking about something that we have to deal with on that end. But there are different definitions out there defining what trespassing is. So then the second question is how bad is trespassing? Well, in 2021, there were 2.5 times more trespassing fatalities than grade crossing fatalities. This graph here shows how trespassing fatalities have stayed relatively the same over that time period, including an increase over the last 10 years. Meanwhile, the reduction in grade crossing fatalities has been tremendous over this time period. However, also showing a leveling off potential uptick here the last 10 years or so. Trespassing fatalities now represent almost 2/3 of all total rail incident fatalities, compared to just 1/3 in that 1976 to 1981 timeframe. This graph really shows a great safety story of all fatalities reduced by about half over that entire time frame, but again shows that nagging trespassing trend. Every state is impacted by rail trespassing. You can really see those high rail activity states such as Texas, California, a lot of the Northeast states really stand out in a heat map like this. Texas is second in trespass fatalities, following California, which for them is about 3 times that. They experience about 3 times the number of fatalities than Texas does. Texas accounts for about 9% of all trespass injuries and fatalities, equaling about 40 fatalities per year. Unfortunately, that number actually jumped to 57 in 2021. For the 10-year period, 2012 to 2021, Harris, Tarrant, Bexar, and Dallas counties experienced 60 or more trespass fatalities and injuries. Tarrant and Dallas experienced the highest level of fatalities with about 31 each. Harris, I think, came in at 28. Our next big question is then why are people trespassing? Homeless encampments are a big driver of trespassing incidents and strikes these days. We heard that from all of the agencies that we talked to. Shortcuts and route conveniences, pedestrians tend to want to take the shortest path. We do need to understand, though, sometimes that next appropriate crossing is very far away from a pedestrian standpoint. So as planners and those involved in this, we need to make sure that we are providing those appropriate crossing locations. Community planning issues may also create incompatible land uses adjacent to the rail lines, and or the rail line may divide housing and goods and services. And so the people may live on this side of the track and the goods and services may be on that other side. So they may be trying to get over there for that. Criminal behavior such as vandalism or copper theft is a big issue, and way too many incidents involving photography and film sessions in recent history. I don't know if y'all have caught a lot of those, but it's really something that should not be happening. Trespassing is happening at grade crossings. So grade crossings are a place that you want people to be crossing, but at the same time it provides an access point to the rail right-of-way. FRA reports that 74% of all trespassing deaths and injuries occurred within 1,000 feet of a grade crossing. Stations and platforms, people tend to cut across, try to catch their train. Their next train may be 30 minutes if they miss this one. So they're looking to make that train, and so they don't always make the right decision in that moment. Based on what we heard, equipment and maintenance yards are magnets for trespassing, especially for vandalism and theft. We've all seen the tagging on the freight rail cars as it passes through on the rail lines. And during our project, DART highlighted their efforts to reduce trespassing on bridges. So what can be done to mitigate trespassing? TTI has led 2 projects through the TRB, Transit Cooperative Research Program. TCRP Report 175, a project led by Dr. Kay Fitzpatrick, focused on treatments as they applied at dedicated crossing locations. And then TCRP Report 233 is the project that I led, and it focused on strategies to mitigate trespassing along the rail rights-of-way. These projects were focused on transit and commuter rail, but really a lot of the strategies could apply for all the different rail systems. Just a quick overview of kind of listing of the treatments, and I know that this isn't necessarily easy to read, and so we'll have these presentations available, and you can go and find these projects and project reports online. TCRP Report 175 included 34 different pedestrian treatment used at dedicated rail crossings. Generally, these treatments were designed to get pedestrians to cross where you want them to cross, when you want them to cross. Signs, signals, pavement markings are all familiar with in the transportation circles, and those certainly included treatments in that project. For TCRP Report 233, the 14 countermeasures are grouped into 3 categories. This page shows the 8 engineering and physical measure strategies. The pictures reflect landscaping as a barrier, fencing, and the use of a track retrieval tool. Just wanted to highlight that a little bit, because this track retrieval device is a simple tool at elevated platforms, especially where you have that power through the third rail. And I didn't mention it, but stations, people tend to drop their phones and everything important. It ends up on the track, and you've got to shut everything down. And so just the simple tool, that the agencies have to reach down there and grab that without it really minimizes the impact on the rail service. But this particular, us including that, kind of demonstrates that not all the possible solutions have to be super time-consuming, multi-year, and expensive to implement. And so wanted to make sure that we included a few of those as well. Countermeasures also include education, engagement, and enforcement activities. I think a major finding in our project was that agencies really seem to reflect a change in thinking about suicide specifically, from something that they really can't do anything about to looking at ways to intercept people in distress. And this really included a lot of efforts to train employees to recognize suicidal behaviors and introducing positive ways to interact with the traveling public. Really, I wanted to just kind of include with a few examples. As I mentioned previously, access to rail right-of-way from grade crossings is a major issue. So you could deter access to the right-of-way from grade crossings with something like these anti-trespass guard panels. You could use technology to detect trespassers. The top right photo, it may be difficult, but it's kind of a box up there. It both is detecting trespassers and it's providing an audible warning to hopefully encourage them to, as quickly as possible, get off the track. Baltimore was also looking at implementing a system to detect people as they got on the train at the subway stations. Another technology application is just monitoring the right-of-way. At the time of our study, DART was looking to use high-resolution cameras for monitoring their rights-of-way. I'm not real sure maybe how that DART system was designed or how they're utilizing it now, but conceptually, repeated and regular monitoring could find issues such as these presented in the photos, such as an open gate or a fence fell over after a storm or a location where pedestrians are finding a way to the right-of-way. You could combine this perhaps with some artificial intelligence that you could program that between the photos and the videos and artificial intelligence, it could alert people of these without somebody having to watch every minute of the videos. Signs play a major role, especially recently with the placement of suicide prevention signs in stations along rights-of-way. We heard that a lot. Amtrak indicated to us how proactive that they have been with using data analytics to determine the best locations for suicide prevention signs. In their effort, they experienced an 81% reduction in suicides after 3 years when they started implementing, putting signs out there. This is all kind of in that California area. The frustrating part for us and many of y'all, of course, is understanding the level of effectiveness of a device or something that you could put out there. And the reality is that doesn't exist much. It doesn't exist much. So to actually have someone tell us 81% improvement and reduction in suicides, I think was very remarkable. In Utah, I don't know if we can get that picture back up, but if you saw it, they employed what they coined as a hope pole. These poles have motion-activated lights and suicide prevention signs. They placed these in the right-of-way a few yards away from the grade crossings, and so that they were having people enter through the grade crossings, and then they could intercept them with these poles with this message of there's hope and there's help. This National 988 Suicide, I'm sorry, I'm behind a little bit, Jonesy. Suicide Crisis Lifeline. I just wanted, in case you didn't know, there is a new National 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, both phone and text. So this number allows for single source number for signs, which could benefit agencies not having to develop one themselves and develop the appropriate partnerships. So a lot of the signs maybe you noticed here, or we included here, have an 800 number. Agencies are trying to work with different people. This 988 offers an opportunity to have this one number universally applied through all rail systems in the U.S., which I think is going to be very beneficial. The FTA recently sent out an advisory encouraging agencies to add this crisis prevention signs with the National 988 number. And education, of course, should always be considered for trespassing safety. Operation Lifesaver produces a lot of good information, including some very powerful videos from survivors and family members related to trespassing. In Texas, Operation Lifesaver, led by Jessica Dvorsky, is spreading the rail safety message in Texas. Finally, I did want to share a couple of FRA items, and I'm not speaking for them, and they may or may not be here to talk about this later, but they are hosting a workshop in Houston May 9th and 10th, and registration is open on that. Keep an eye for FRA grant program page for opportunities, as there has been a significant amount of dollars dedicated to trespass and suicide programs, prevention programs. FRA has several online dashboards and maps for both trespassing and grade crossing, some of which you saw me capture during this presentation, and they have an online toolkit similar to our final product that can be used to identify possible mitigation strategies. So certainly look up our products and see if it can benefit you, but also note that FRA has some online tools as well. And that is it for me. I appreciate it.
Okay, we have time for some questions from both Jeff and Alan. And we have some microphones we'll be passing around here. So if you would like to put up a question, please raise your hand and we'll come over and talk with you. There we go.
Just one question relative to a lot of transit, let's say organizations around the world have a similar problem with trespass and tram systems. I'm thinking of some streetcar systems. How much are you learning from what they have already done maybe with tram systems in major cities with the same kind of trespass issues?
Yeah, we did. In the video, it mentioned that we had some case studies as part of that project, and I think that included 5 U.S., but it did include 2 international. We talked with the Netherlands and London Underground, trying to get their perspectives. And there's been a lot of really great literature on the efforts over in Europe and other locations, South Korea. So we did our best to capture as much as we could. Streetcars was not necessarily part of this particular project. It was in the other project, but certainly a lot to learn, I think, especially in suicide prevention, and a lot of the programs that they're trying to implement over there is something that the U.S. agencies could really learn from.
You were first.
Hello. Testing. On the long train study that you'll be doing, will you just be looking at existing rail traffic, or will you be considering the significant increase in passenger traffic that's expected in the future?
I think we're going to be asked to look at both. Passenger freight interaction was one of the elements that was directly mentioned in the legislation that gave us our instruction. How longer trains work with smaller, faster passenger trains, and particularly with $60 billion set out in IIJA for passenger development, that's something that we'll be considering. And we have a former Amtrak person on our study committee, and have been, and Amtrak has been involved in talking to our committee too.
Excuse me, my question is for Jeff. The Amtrak number was remarkable, 81%. Congratulations to Amtrak, and I wish they'd talk about that more, because I think that's very, very impressive. I'm curious how much work was done or has been done on what I guess I would call the social determinants of these incidents. I mean, we sort of touched on it. Homeless encampments, suicides, we all know, have always been a pretty large component. But I didn't see much else in terms of the breakdown and so forth. And what I did see was a lot of engineering solutions to what are really social problems. And I wonder how much work has been done along those lines, and whether there's room for more of that work to be done.
think for our project, what we found is kind of what you're relaying is that up to this point, still a lot of engineering and type of things. And what I think when the agency's saying that they feel like they can do more with more of that personal interaction with the customers is one aspect of kind of transitioning into kind of the next level. I think in addition to homeless and other social things, we have kind of the land use aspect that really we didn't touch on that a lot because there just really wasn't a lot of research on that. I do think that in the Netherlands case, there was a lot of interaction between the rail agency and those agencies that were dealing with things like drug rehab facilities and stuff. They had they were developing those types of partnerships. They understood that they needed to kind of get out in the community, understand what was happening there, and work on those types of aspects. I think we heard that a little bit from the U.S. agencies, and we're restricted on what we did within the project. And so, but I think we heard that a few times, but I think that is an increasing awareness by the agencies around is that they need to start working as part of that bigger social aspects, the homelessness and the drug and alcohol abuse, those types of things were really things that we heard, we were beginning to hear. We understood were beginning to happen at the agencies.
This is directed toward Alan. In terms of the National Academy and the stakeholders you described and the input, my question is this. How is the public represented, and to what degree are you getting inputs from the leagues of cities and people like that as compared to the labor unions and the railroads themselves? Thank you.
My understanding is one of the things that will happen at our next meeting is, particularly when we're talking about grade crossings, we are going to be hearing from not only some state DOTs and from some community levels. As for how directly to get engaged in the study itself, I'll have to get back to you on providing some information on how the general public can contribute.
This is for Alan. My experience is that the makeup of a long train is really critical. In my earlier experience with Katie, we were real careful to put loaded cars and heavier cars towards the front of the train, and things like empty auto racks or empty spine cars for lumber towards the end of the train, because they sometimes had cushion underframe, and they also tended to, if you had a light car in front and a heavy car came crashing down on it, you had real problems that the engineer couldn't control.
And that's certainly one of the things that came out of that Hyndman, Pennsylvania derailment, and then the issues that came from that. Train makeup, train placement, that's something that each of the railroads has been talking to us about what they do to plan for that. Some of them have models which look at this is what we have to move, this is the territory it's going to move over given the geography and the topography. That has a lot to do with where DPUs are placed and how the train is made up. The question is how well are those plans and models carried out on a daily basis, and how are train crews and folks who are out in the field, are they given those kinds of tools, and working with the folks in the cab, at the dispatching, and at the point of those trains being made up on a daily basis. The other thing that happened as a result of that Pennsylvania accident was you had a number of that train got longer by putting additional sets of cars on the end of it without a whole lot of attention to the overall design of the train itself. So it's something that has to be an awful lot of care given to how that train is made up. and communicating to the train crew, this is what you have, and this is what the territory you're going to be on. But it's certainly, those are the kinds of things that we've been hearing from both the railroads themselves as to how they plan for that, and the different folks out on the crews and the field is how they've been trained or explained, or how they deal with that on a daily basis.
One of the things that came out during the STB's hearings on the Gulf Coast was how the railroads are dealing with these very long trains with sidings that are insufficient. And one of the things that came out in some of that testimony was that on some parts of some railroad in some places, because it's single-track railroad with insufficient sidings, they basically become a directional railroad for some parts of the day, because there's no other way this train is going to get across the territory within the allotted number of hours a crew can work. Is there something in what you guys and gals are going to be looking at that takes a look at what that kind of operation does to the capacity of the railroad, whether it's additional freight or passenger? If you become a directional railroad for a morning or for 4 or 6 hours, you basically are diminishing the capacity of your railroad for some long through train and can't really do anything else because there's no way to get out of the way of these mile, 2 mile, 3 mile long trains. Is its effect on capacity something in the scope of what you're looking at?
Yeah, that's certainly, and it's certainly something that we've heard from folks. It also speaks to the challenges of making an across-the-board, one-size-fits-all regulatory process, acting to make sure that procedures and plans are put in place to deal with the railroads that you have and the segments and subdivisions as you have them. That's certainly something that we're looking at and trying to figure out, how do we communicate to the railroads to deal with the systems that they have in place.
So is that a yes?
It is we are thinking about it. How we develop something is something we haven't done yet.
Do you have any figures on the percentages of trains?
Do you have any figures on the percentages of trains that meet the criteria over 7,500 feet?
The AAR has shared with us some data on how the distribution by length of train. Part of the issue that I think we and public agencies have is having access to information about how trains are actually working on the system on a daily basis. The railroads have some valid proprietary issues about sharing that kind of information. But the other thing that we've heard from railroads and from the association is that a lot of longer trains, particularly those that exceed that 7,500 foot criteria, have been operated for a long time. So part of what we're trying to come to grips with is, how extensive are these? How extensive are they on the entire rail network across the country? And how do we respond to providing some best practices and good rules of thumb to make sure that they're going to be operated safely?
Okay, we have time for one last question.
There he is.
Yes, please. A question for Mr. Rudder. This may be something which is already on your plate. There is a problem with respect to the length of the trains as they're associated with blocking arterial traffic routes. I've seen this happen on several occasions, and you would hope that an issue of siding would come up to be that would be a more long-term view, if you will. But as simple a matter as contacting the sheriff's department, the police department, and alerting first responders to the fact that there's going to be a blockage on this route, that would be, it's not a long-term answer, but it's a short-term answer. Because when you're trying to get a fire truck or an ambulance to a stop and you've got a train crossing out there that's blocked, you've got real issues. So I would just encourage you to bring that into the mix and the equation as you look for a solution.
Thanks for that, Judge. And it's certainly the issue of block crossings associated with both train operations, how trains are staged before yards or switching operations, and just the fact that you have that longer train moving through a crossing that's going to take longer than it might have in a previous time. That's certainly something that's on our list of things we have to be concerned about.
All right, thank you, Alan Rutter, Jeff Warner from Texas A&M Transportation Institute.